Hey there, fish keepers, Dean here. For those of you who only like to watch the first 30 seconds of a video or trust me without any question, try No Planaria for killing Hydra and Planaria. It works really great. Just follow the directions. If you have a lot of Planaria, reduce the numbers first because you don't want to impact the cycle at all. But I had fantastic success with it in a number of tanks. For those of you who need more convincing and keep sensitive fish, I will go over my experience with No Planaria. In the past, I've had some disasters from treating aquariums with things like levamisole and fenbendazole, and as a kid, methylene blue. So I'm super sensitive to using any kind of a chemical in my tanks because I really do not want to upset the nitrogen cycle because I've done it before and it's been a disaster. If you feed a lot of live foods, it's likely that you'll see Hydra at some point. We all get plants from different sources. We get fish from different sources. If you feed pond foods, you've probably introduced Hydra into your tank at some point. Usually they're undetectable in tanks that I never feed live foods to. I've seen them on the underside of leaves. But when you do start feeding live foods, you can start to see Hydra take a good foothold in your tank. So I usually don't want to treat any of my tanks, but I had a gentleman come over to pick up plants, and he looked in this tank and seen the Hydra, and he's like, "Hey, I've got those in my tank. How do you get rid of them? I hate those things." So I told them that I'd heard that No Planaria works really well for getting rid of Hydra as well. So he was all over it. He treated his tanks, got back to me, came over the next week. He's like, they're totally gone. Had no problems with my fish or my plants. He said, but his mystery snails were a little bit uncomfortable. So with his success, I decided to try it out on one of my breeding tanks. Now this tank had quite a bit of Hydra, but more so planaria. So I reduced the number of planaria in the tank, and then I used the no planaria as directed. It turned out really well. I got rid of the Hydra and the planaria fairly quickly. I actually did an extra dose because it seemed like the planaria were holding on, but I'm now back to feeding these guys that are live foods again, and it was quite a success, enough to convince me to try out one of my fry tanks. Now, this tank, for whatever reason, I put these blue eyes in here when they were teeny tiny, and immediately I ended up with just a Hydra storm. I don't know, there must have been like a low baseline level of Hydra in this tank, and it just exploded with the feeding. And I was feeding it pretty heavy because I also have baby Corridorus panda in this tank as well. So I wanted to have quite a bit of brine shrimp and microworms getting to the bottom of the tank where the little panda cories could eat it up. So I was feeding it quite heavy as well. So I think that's the primary reason why the Hydra just absolutely exploded in this tank. It was a disaster. Like, I think probably like 25 or 30% of the brine shrimp and microworms that I was feeding was just straight up being consumed by Hydra. It was absolutely everywhere. You can see on the glass here, it's just covered in Hydra. And I was starting to, you know, not want to look at the tank because the Hydra situation was so bad. So I knew I needed to do something, but I didn't want to take a risk with fry, right? Because you'd expect that they would be a bit more sensitive than other fish. So I tried it out on the Asian rummy noses first. But you can see here, it's just gotten to a ridiculous level. Like anywhere where there was flow in the tank, the Hydra were just thick. Um, the fish were doing fine. Like the blue eyes were doing fine. Uh, but I thought that the shrimp were being bothered by the Hydra quite a bit. They were bouncing around. I think that they were getting stung every once in a while, so you'd see them all of a sudden fling up into the air. So I was feeling kind of bad about that. But the fish that I thought that was being impacted the most by it were the little Corydoras panda. You can see there's a little bit of hydra on the bottom here. They just didn't seem like they were comfortable at all, and they had a little bit of whitishness on their fins. So you can see here on the back of the tank the hydra, and so I decided to treat it. And after about 2 days, all the tentacles on the hydra fell off. There was no impacts to the fish, no clouding of the water. The shrimp seemed fine. But it impacted the hydra fairly quickly. So this is after about the 3rd dose, and there's almost no hydra left. I could barely find any to film. There's just like a little capsule left over from the hydra. And what I didn't know in this tank was it also had a bit of planaria as well. So these planaria had crawled up onto the glass to die. And so it worked for them as well. I didn't do the extra dose on this tank that I did on the Asian rummy noses because I didn't feel like there was a ton of planaria in there, and I haven't seen any since at all. So they just up and died, and now the tank is looking fantastic. The fish are a lot more sprightly because they get more food, because the hydra are not eating all the food in the tank, and it's looking pretty good. So absolutely cleaned up the hydra 100%. I haven't seen any planaria at all, and all my shrimp are doing good, and the Corydoras panda are looking way better. They seem to have really responded well to the treatment. They're a lot more lively, and they seem to be a lot more comfortable in the tank. You can see the little guys here. So No Planaria, I highly recommend it. But there is a little bit of a truth to my whole experience in putting this together, is that I found a new respect for hydra. Happy fish keeping. Here's the truth. Oh, that's really cool. I like hydra now. I don't want to get rid of them.